So in the last episode, you saw some of the language that was being used in private settings, right? And you saw some of the private messages as well. But to understand why those messages matter, I think you really have to understand the culture that I was in at the time. You have to understand that in many Pentecostal churches, pastors are not just pastors, they are spiritual fathers. And I talked a little bit about this in the previous video about how those dynamics matter in a very unique way. That title carries enormous authority. So what does that mean? That means that a spiritual father is someone who you're taught to trust, you're taught to obey. That's one thing. Someone you are taught to believe hears directly from God about your life, directly from God about your life in ways that you don't. You don't hear God the way that he does. He would talk about his prophetic connection because he was the prophet. The prophet hears directly from God. So there was a unique relationship. He would talk about everyone being only able to see or hear fragments of what God has to say to them or for them because he was the prophet. He had a unique ability. He would quote some scriptures, and I'm no theologian, so we know in part, we see in part, we look through a glass darkly, something of that nature. He would find any justification to rationalize his process. When I was younger in the church, I believe that relationship I had with my pastor was mentorship. Especially in the beginning, there was nothing to question it in the beginning, not in my mind. I believe he was guiding me in my spiritual growth. I felt like I needed to be acceptable to God, to my community, to my family, especially being seen as this homosexual. I needed that not to be my identity. So I believe that he was protecting my future. Okay. But, over time, the relationship started shifting. It didn't take much time, especially when my brother was out of the way. When my brother was no longer, we weren't a duo as we used to be. I was isolated. Then, attention became more personal, conversations became more private, the emotional language became a lot stronger. Because of the authority he held in the church at the time, questioning it, I'm going to keep saying it felt impossible. And I don't know if you've ever been in a position where no matter what you say or felt that you should have said would not have been heard or respected. I don't know if you've been in a situation, but I can only speak that was my story at the time, being powerless. When spiritual authority and emotional attachment mix together, there's a unique relationship that happens there. The line becomes very difficult to see. So this is especially true when you are young. You're trying to be a good church member. You're trying to be on the up and up. And I'll bring this back to some more documents because there's a connection to the previous episode that I think needs to be brought forward. That is why the language in those messages matter, because it wasn't coming from a peer. This man was more than 20 years my senior at the time. It was coming from someone who held spiritual authority over my life, someone I had been taught to trust. And I'll say this, because I think this is another layer. The situation became even more complicated and complex when conversation about his marriage started to appear in the messages and the rides and everything. Before preaching, I would be in his office getting him ready, and he would be decompressing, dumping, I'll say, on me on the way to church before he gets in the pulpit. And then I have to sit in the pulpit and sit with all of this, and then sit with all of the fact that he has made advances toward me. And I have to make it look good. I have to be Brother John and get up and shout. And whatever the man of God commanded, I had to respond appropriately. He would test my responses because he knew I would look foolish in front of everybody, and it would make me look like I was being rebellious. And that was the case in many scenarios. I was kicked out of the church. I tried to have demons cast out of me. All the members and all the clergy would get involved, circle around me. I mean, so many situations have happened, but I digress. The messages about his wife starting to appear was problematic because at that point, the relationship was no longer just mentorship. I'll just say this in closing. It was becoming something else entirely.